How I Got Here, the inside stories of startups and innovation in travel and transportation, with your hosts, PhocusWire's Kevin May and Mozio's David Litwak.
Hello there, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to How I Got Here. These are the inside stories that travel startups and innovation, travel, transport, tourism, all those kind of things. This is another episode. I'm Kevin May, and always I'm joined by my co-host David Litwak. Right, so for this episode, in inverted commas, incentivizing accountability might sound like something from a management consultancy handbook, but you know, it's actually a really neat idea from a company called TravelBank, where the employees for the companies that it works with are rewarded for better handling their expenses. Now, to talk us through this and to give us a sense of how we built the company after creating and selling one just a few years before, is this week's special guest. It's the CEO and co-founder of TravelBank. That's Duke Chung. Welcome to How I Got Here, Duke.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay,
and excited to share our stories.
Okay, we're looking forward to hearing them. So the very first question we always ask everybody is, as succinctly as you can, Duke, tell us, how did you get here?
Yeah, so TravelBank has started at the end of 2016, and I started this business when we had actually just sold our previous business, Parature, to Microsoft, and I didn't have any plans, in fact, to stay on at the time. But staying on to be part of Microsoft did change the history for myself. I soon learned post-acquisition because we were being asked to move to many of the Microsoft systems that Microsoft uses specific vendors to handle their expense and travel. And unbeknownst to me, because we as a small business didn't have anything like that for ourselves, we were being asked to move to Concur. And I would say in a matter of 6 months, it became one of the bigger complaints that we heard from our employees post-acquisition. And we had never used anything like it before, so it was a first-time experience. But that didn't change my thinking until sometime in 2015, when there was a big announcement around Concur being acquired by SAP for billions of dollars. And that's when it actually caught my attention, unknowingly how large this market is, and really the need for travel and expense capabilities across every company. And basically, I went to take a look a little bit more into the space, and what I recognized and soon realized was that this is a tremendous opportunity in that moment to think about how to build something amazing that can help really transform the next 10 years. And so I left Microsoft and moved out to San Francisco to pursue this next chapter in my entrepreneurial career to build TravelBank.
And yeah, that's terrific. Thank you. I mean, when you came up with the idea and you were looking around and you could see what Concur does, and there are frankly there's some other fairly large companies that are also involved in expense management. How did you kind of set out the idea in relation to what they do and what you thought that you could do? I mean, give us a sense of how long that took until you came up with the core idea behind TravelBank.
Yeah, so first of all, TravelBank, our mission is to focus on building a delightful and complete expense and travel solution for every user. Every user, I think, is really important in our mission because what we've recognized moving into this space was that these travel and expense systems have historically been built supporting larger enterprises, larger companies, and possibly because of the way these products were distributed through, a series of very successful travel management companies. The American Expresses, the BCDs, the Carlsons, they have been major influencers in how these products were distributed. And the way the products were built, we believe, really were focused on the larger end of the segment, the enterprises and the upper mid-markets. And But one thing that's changed, as we all know, in the last 5 years plus, is the distribution of these products, inaccessibility to these enterprise capabilities. Before mobile phones and before the app stores, and even before online distribution, the only primary channels to distribute these kind of products were through these travel agencies. And I think what's changed so much in the last 5 years is now everyone has a mobile phone. Everybody goes to the app store to download their apps, and that fundamentally has reduced the friction for users. Users in this case would be employees at companies, to be able to gain access to these technologies in ways that were not available in the past. And I think this fundamentally changes the way that these types of enterprise products can now be easily accessible and to be available in the hands of these users in a much faster way. And so our mission was set out really to build an amazing technology with an incredible experience around expenses and travel, but focus on making it available to everybody around the world, not just the largest companies because they're working with their travel agencies, but quite frankly, any company, small businesses, startups, the segments of the markets around the world that have never been accessed or have never had the access to these types of technologies because of the limitations before.
Very cool. So Duke, we had the president, I was about to say founder, but he's the president of Amex GBT on a few episodes ago. And we were talking about how they're trying to kind of break away from the TMC being only the service layer to also be in, kind of into the tech side as well. I'd love if you could elaborate a little bit on how you thought about that traditional divisions between TMCs, travel management corporations for the service lever, OBTs, online booking tools for the tech layer, and how you maybe streamline that. Because from what I understand, you threw it all out. You're not working with very many third parties, if any. When it comes to service, you have tech and service in house.
Yeah. So the way we see it, first off, is just sort of evidence of scale. The TravelBank now in 2.5 years has grown to 120,000 users. We're adding 10,000 a month of new users. We reach 20,000 organizations. So to give everyone a sense of scale in just a relatively short amount of time, when we talk about reducing this friction to get out there. And I think what's in the question around, how this is becoming more separated, the first generation of travel management companies, we'll call them TMC 1.0, if you will. You reference Amex GBT and others. That segment historically has been very successful because as a large enterprise or mid-market, when I need a travel service, I don't really think about going to Concur right away. I actually would call Amex GBT. And I would evaluate the TMCs based on service quality and ability to scale. And then when it comes to the technology, and this you'd reference online booking tool, the OBT, they can all resell the same products. And typically, Concur has been very popular. Of course, there's others in that generation as well. So if you kind of step back and look at what has happened to get to where we are, the TMC 1.0s, would say, have typically led the differentiation from a customer service perspective, how well they can provide adequate scale and service quality when it comes to travel support. And technology has always been second to that. Technology is had always been, part of the RFP, what online booking tools should be considered to be part of this overall experience. And that's how these systems had been implemented and why everyone is where they are today, through, seeing that scale up around the world. But what's changed in the last, few years, and we believe is going to continue to change in the next decade, is now the differentiation is no longer happening at the customer service level. It's actually happening at the technology level. So where the TMC 2.0 companies like TravelBank are leading our differentiation with technology, we are showing the companies what the technology experience can be like for their employees and also for their admins, their finance teams, how delightful that experience can be. And the service side is actually becoming second to it, which is the service side check the boxes of our expectations? That's being evaluated secondly. So we believe this is very disruptive. We call it the beginning of the digital transformation of the travel and expense industry, where we've seen this happen in other industries as well. Clearly retail is the best example, right? When everything moved online in the last couple of decades. But also examples like, Blockbuster and Netflix. We've seen Peloton come out. I guess time will tell to see how that does. But every category has its own technology disruption, where seemingly our world is moving more towards looking at the technology first. And in our industry here for travel and expense, we believe that this transformation is just at the beginning of it happening. And we may be just one of a set of providers that are seeing it the same way, with leading with technology first, and then providing the 24/7 travel support experience as part of that solution, as part of our differentiation.
Awesome. So we've had a couple people on the podcast who've talked about the difference between a fix-it business and a truly disruptive business. And so this brings me to, how did you think about the potential of working with others? KDS sold to Amex GBT recently, and they were, more of a fix-it business. They wanted to kind of create a next generation OPT. I feel like you're more of a disruptive business. And why did you think that was the correct pathway to go versus kind of working with other people in the industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we, one of the areas of focus that really differentiates us is TravelBank has started in the SMB space and also in the U.S. So when we look at the U.S. markets, who's in each segment, if I were to split it out, the $300 billion market for the U.S., I would say roughly 2/3 of it is in the mid-market and enterprise. That's already being handled by a managed travel management company like an Amex or a BCD or a Carlson. But the other remaining 1/3, which call it roughly $100 billion, is in the smaller medium business market, the SMB segment, which are typically companies that spend $10 million of travel or less. Oftentimes it's even much smaller. Could be as much as like $50,000 a year. That segment we had found had been extraordinarily underserved. 90% of the time when we sign up a new customer in this segment, we're the first solution in. So the company doesn't have anything. And so they're leading to us mainly because of our technology differentiation, to be able to get them up and running quickly, and to be able to support a small but growing set of employees within their company as their business scales. And so what we found was that teaming up with the TMCs, to help them support their customers would naturally bring us into the mid-market enterprise, which was a space that we had considered, but it would be a very long sales cycle. And quite frankly, I think given that this industry is pretty old school, as you guys know, we didn't have that much success when we reached out to the TMCs early on. We were quickly shown the door and laughed out into the street because the setup was already in place. The TMCs and our incumbents and the TMC, the first generation products, they were very successful together, successful partnerships. Nobody wanted to disrupt the status quo. And what we've learned is throughout the years, many new online booking technologies had come in to try to team up with the TMCs, but their products were always the last on the list or never included in there. So it was a battle that we felt like was too hard to fight because, there was already too much success being enjoyed in the current setup. And it is a true story. We went in and we were shown the door. So, one would have to figure out how to find their fit in this market. And thankfully, it is a very big market. So, and we believe, that's why there's so many TMCs out there, so everybody can serve a different market. But we just have to figure out what made sense for us. And, because we're technology led and we're using technology as a differentiation for our product, but also for our go-to-market to acquire, for lower cost. We can bring these customers in at much lower cost. We felt like the small business market was actually a great place for us to start and grow with and learn how to build a mature product over time. And then, evaluate our go-to-market as we build this business and see what happens in, 5 or 10 years. Maybe we come back and team up with the TMCs over time. That's possible. But for now, the $100 billion US market is, I had one TMC CEO tell me that, Duke, if you guys were to just win the entire US SMB market, you would be bigger than Amex GBT, which is, I think, true based on the numbers we've seen. So.
It's interesting, just to wind back a little bit to something that you just said there a second, Duke, and you were saying, you were knocking on the doors of the TMCs and they were showing you the door fairly quickly. And, there's often the phrase that's bandied around is, the gatekeepers of the status quo. Can you just give us a sense of how long that was into the TravelBank journey that you realised that you needed to go down the path that you're currently on, i.e. how long was your patience at that point?
It didn't take long at all. The company has TravelBank's only been live for about 2.5 years. We launched November 2016, so it hasn't been a very long journey. And as you can tell, we've already talked to a lot of people and ended up in this path. But the first year we launched our expense product, and while our expense products were in the market, we were busy thinking about how to build the the online booking platform with the concierge service. So we had many, many conversations in 2017 with the TMCs, with many TMCs, not just the largest TMCs, the megas, but also a lot of regionals as well. And we were constantly, I think, also not only being shown the door by the TMCs, but quite frankly, also a lot of suppliers. A lot of suppliers on the airline side would ask us questions around how much volume we would have. And, being a startup, that's not your advantage. You don't have a lot of volume. So it's not something you can put on a chart and show them and guarantee them anything. And so naturally, I think the barriers to get into this business are quite high because expectations are high from the beginning in order to play. And I think because of this, it really forced us to think about what is a market that we could be successful in that others are not in. Maybe we can find a way to acquire that segment in a different way, maybe using technology or channels. And also, how do we focus on really building up momentum within our install base so that we can sell this inventory that these airlines want us to sell? So a lot of effort has been gone into focusing on acquisition of customers and users for that purpose, the flywheel we call it, to make sure that we reduce all friction for users to sign it, and therefore we can move them into a TravelBank managed account directly, so we can sell the inventory and support our suppliers as we scale up. Our expense product is a free product, and so companies around the world, typically their employees are the ones who find us in the App Store, so they download our app, and we help them do an expense report. And then soon thereafter, their companies may sign up and standardize us on expenses. And then that usually will lead into, at some point when the small business scales up and they need more help around travel, like travel policies or reward incentives, analytics, they'll standardize with us on a managed travel program. So effectively, our efforts to scale this business has been more around thinking about how do we work with these small businesses to solve their problems early and pay it forward so that when they scale up, we have an opportunity to work with them on the travel side over time. Not all of them will reach that initial scale, but the ones that do, we are there ready to support them. And as you can imagine, the only reason we think this way was because of all the feedback we've gotten from the industry around ensuring that we meet minimum requirements in order to carry the inventory to be meaningful for them to be in this business.
Now, just on that a little bit again, if we may, Duke, I mean, the customer acquisition part, I mean, it's great that, as companies that you work with get bigger, you can help them do more things, and that's more volume for you. But, how have you generally approached just trying to get customers to come along and use the products? You did reference briefly there the App Store and things like that. Just give us an idea of what it's been like trying to get hold of these customers so far.
Yeah, so I mentioned TravelBank has now, we announced last week at our conference, we have 120,000 registered users on our platform. The registered users are be employees at small businesses. It could be just one employee at a company. They find us in the App Store or Play Store or online as well. And one of our missions in our product is if we can't help you do an expense report or book a flight within 2 minutes of signing up from our app, then we failed. So it has to be that easy for any employee, because the only reason why an employee will look for us in the App Store is because their company doesn't have something, but they're in a situation where they either need to get a reimbursement for an expense report, or expense reports, I should say, is more general, over a period of time that that has gone by and they need to get it done, or they find us and want to book a flight or hotel in our system. So that first experience is so important for the employee, because if the employee doesn't have a first good experience, then there's no opportunity for us to continue to expand within that company. But if they do have a good experience, what happens is that employee may go tell their CFO or their controller that I found this app. It's really amazing. It helped me take photos of my receipts and scan them and create an expense report in 2 minutes, and here it is, and be able to get their reimbursements in 12 hours. So it's a really nice experience for them. And they'll tell the controller. They'll also tell other people in the company. So they'll tell their coworkers, "Hey, I found this app. You should use it." People sitting around them. And I would say typically when a company gets to around 5 or 10 users on our expenses, then there's enough visibility within the companies, especially small businesses, that the companies would hear about it, and the decision makers would just standardize their entire company on our expense system. And so that happens.
On that, sorry, Duke, just on that. I mean, it's interesting. You rarely hear about a startup in business travel that's almost grown, dare I say, in a viral way because of this word of mouth, whereas often it's done in arguably a more structured way. It sounds like you have benefited a lot from the kind of the viral word of mouth part of it.
That's right. Yeah. And I think, we were also very fortunate. I mentioned the barriers to being able to deploy an expense and travel solution are now not gated from the top down, where historically that's how this industry had sold into these enterprises. But as you can see in this example, every day we have hundreds, and every month we have thousands of users that just sign up across different organizations around the world. And I mean, if you don't believe me, last week we shared, actually we just made this announcement of Will Smith, actor Will Smith, and Keisuke Honda. Of course, hopefully you guys all know Will Smith. And Will Smith's agency actually found us that way. They downloaded our app and started to do expenses, started to do travel, and one thing led to another. They decided they want to invest in TravelBank, and we announced that this week. So we also, many people think we only support the Silicon Valley companies in the Bay Area here, but in fact we have universities like Princeton that are on our system. We have I know, David, you're in New York. We have a very famous congresswoman in New York. I won't mention on this podcast, but you can probably figure it out. We support her. We support her agency. And even like Will Smith as an actor, right? You just never know. I think that's probably the most amazing thing about this business, because there's no barriers to signing up for our system. You really don't know who's going to come through the door the next day. We didn't reach out to any of these companies, or organizations or agencies. They have all seemingly just heard about us or found us online in these app stores. And I think fundamentally, that's the biggest change and disruption that's happened, is this the reduced friction, the ease to get up and running for systems like expense and travel that have never been available prior. That is extraordinarily disruptive in this space.
I wanted to quickly rewind on something you said. You made the expense process free. It sounds like almost like a freemium to attract these SMBs. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, maybe Concur has a free tier. I doubt it, though. Concur charges for expense, and I know that's actually the majority of their business. And you seem to kind of dangle this as an incentive for people signing up. And I think that's a kind of a huge turning of the business model on its head, where something where people are normally making money off that part, you decided to give away. Was that on purpose?
Yes, it was on purpose, but you have to remember, because we started in a small business market, we really spent a lot of time thinking about what are the constraints and the issues that these small businesses have. Now, I believe the Concurs of the world and their peers had started more in the mid-market enterprise, where potentially paying for expense software is not a big deal because these are very large companies and professional CFOs that are running these organizations, right? So for them, it's sort of remembering back to my old Microsoft days, post-acquisition. I think budget was probably less of a concern for us when it made it to that step, right? But for small businesses, it's a very different situation. And David, I know you as running a small business too. Our constraints are different. We think about these products differently. Our employees are also thinking about which problems it relates to the products that they use, how to be able to get access to technologies quicker and easier and effectively, less cost. So understanding the small business market, we intentionally made our products for free. And currently it's not freemium because we don't charge for it over time. We have effectively made it free for businesses, even if they scale up. And our goal is really to earn their travel business over time. Now, a small business may not have much travel in their first year or 2 years, but as they start to build out their sales and marketing functions, as they start to attend more events, or maybe host their own sales and marketing or customer acquisition activities, they tend to start to begin to spend a little bit more. And when they reach a certain threshold, that's when we believe our travel program can come in and really help them streamline the approval flows and also help them save money or begin to save money as they scale up. And that's our model, is to focus on earning that business over time.
So what's interesting is that I remember hearing some stat that most of the money that a lot of these OBTs make are actually on their expense solution. And I think they also would theoretically like to capture a lot of that travel spend as well. But I've been to more than a few business travel conferences where they talk about the problem of people at major companies going and booking on Kayak and then filing it back into the expense system. And I think one of the reasons why these OBTs have monetized expenses is because, frankly, many of them have not been able to keep up on the user interface side. So it's a long way. Yeah, it's a long way of getting to the question of how are you thinking about what is a very complex user experience? Because you're talking about multiple modes and then expensing and all this stuff working together, and you're only going to capture that travel spend if the end user experience is just as good as, frankly, as going to Kayak or Expedia.
That's right. And one of the things we talk a lot about here within TravelBank is looking back at the current offerings in the space, our incumbents, our older incumbents, if you will. I think one of the areas of focus has been largely around just the admin functionality. It's all about the admin. It's about admin functionality, because once these companies lock in, it's about making sure the admin doesn't push them out. But quite frankly, the traveler experience, the traveler benefits have always been secondary or even third to the admin functionality. The only thing that might compete with the traveler experience is these OBTs also have to support TMCs as constituents too, so sometimes that fits in between. But clearly the traveler experience has been really poor. And it makes sense, because once you've locked in the admin and you've built a travel policy for the company, then the traveler doesn't really have much choice. If it's their own choice, if they go outside of policy, they just hope they don't get caught, or the company has very loose, requirements. If something does happen.
It's almost like they chose their solution based on what the travel manager would help the travel manager manage the various RFP things the best, not necessarily what was going to help them day to day.
That's right. Yep. But and there's a place for the admin. Don't get me wrong. I think when it comes to building a policy and putting a program in place and ultimately helping the company save money, there is definitely value that's being delivered there. But the question is really to what expense of the traveler. The traveler is the one that's actually going out on the road, who's trying to focus on improving their productivity, reduce their stress, and make sure they get to and from these meetings and conferences effectively, having a really great experience. So the question there is, where was that balance? And was the balance actually getting further apart as these companies became more successful? So what I really liked about what we're doing at TravelBank here is that we intentionally focused on making the product available to everybody, almost like a consumer-like distribution. And the onus is on us, like you mentioned, to deliver a really delightful, a really great experience for the traveler. Because if we can't win the traveler, we shouldn't win the account itself. There's no reason to force a company to use TravelBank if the users don't like the experience. So the way we've been able to be successful is really laser focus on the traveler experience, make sure the travelers like us for not only doing their expenses, not just travelers, just generally an employee in a company also has to just like our app, for expenses, right? For everyday expenses. So users have to like our app. And only if the users like our app, we call it winning the hearts and minds of the employees, then we deserve to win the account. And I think what that does from a mindset for our business, particularly our product and our design and our engineering teams, is it really puts the onus on us to deliver an experience we can stand behind, that the companies can trust, that we're doing a good job to make sure that their travelers are having the best experience they can out there. At least at parity, hopefully better over time to what they would be able to do in the open bookings situation on other public sites. We at least have to get to that level of standard. So when we hire design teams, and we made this mistake earlier because when I started this business, I come from the enterprise software, so I hired a lot of product managers, and we soon realized that the product managers from the enterprise side actually couldn't design a product that met this expectation. So we had to start all over again very early in TravelBank, and I decided to rehire a new set of designers and product managers that were from the consumer side. So we have folks that come from Airbnb or Hotwire or these online booking platforms, the public sites, and we wanted to bring, like TripAdvisor, we're bringing them in to help us design this product, because what I found was bringing the product designers, the designers and product managers in from the consumer side, the baseline of expectation and quality is also higher. And that was really important for us. And that's how we were able to begin to change the momentum of this business early on, was really building at that higher standard. And I think that's really important to set the foundation early for that, because if we truly believe we can win by winning the hearts and minds of the employees for these companies, then we have to build a product experience that actually can win these folks over. And that starts with hiring the right people on our team.
Very cool. So I want to ask one more question that's a little more in the weeds before we kind of move on to general company stuff. But, for Mozio operates a lot in the corporate travel world, and we get all types of very specific content requests. I want my limousine service in New Jersey, which happens to be on random specific system that we don't have yet. And, it ends up being a huge supply problem. How do we get all of this supply in our system? So, my question is twofold. Do you cater to any companies like that, or because you're in the SMB market, people you just normally tell those companies tough, this is what we have? And two, how did you think about supply from the beginning? Did you just hook up to Skyscanner and be like, great, we have flights right now, and then we'll go and replace Skyscanner individually one by one, or what was your general supply strategy?
Well, I would say we weren't that smart about it. So, because remember, I entered this business not having come from the business travel space. Maybe the only advantage was having sold enterprise software, but as you guys know, this industry is very specific. There are a lot of specific attributes to the business travel industry and how everything is all tied together. So, our early discovery process involved us just trying to figure out how to get access to the inventory. So we went down the path of working with the GDS systems directly, but we soon thereafter discovered that a lot of these airlines also required minimum requirements to get going on the airline side specifically. I think maybe less on the hotel, but the airlines. And so we were very fortunate. Part of our early journey, in fact, I believe in our first 10 employees, we hired over the head of supply over from Hitmonk. Now, why Hitmonk? It turns out actually San Francisco, although being such a great place for amazing technology companies. It actually turns out to be a very poor place for travel tech. There aren't a lot of consumer or even business travel vendors in this area, at least not historically. Everyone else was based either in New York or Seattle from a travel experience. So it was very difficult for us to find domain expertise or people who simply had just relationships with the airlines and the hotels. Except for Hipmunk. Hipmunk was the only one in this area that actually, I would say, had a concentrated group of domain experts. But that was it. After them, I think it would drop off pretty significantly as far as the next player in this area. So we were very fortunate. We were able to recruit over some of the team over from Hipmunk. And that's when we discovered that to do this right, not only would we need a relationship, but we'd also have to go apply for all these licenses. So we are ARC and IATA accredited travel agency. And we went through that entire process to make sure all of our licensing was in place so that we are able to sell the inventory, at least beginning in the United States, and then hopefully expand from here. And so we went through that entire process. And I think now looking at some of our up and coming competitors, they haven't even gone through that process. They find another way to sort of get going first, and maybe over time they go back and apply for licenses. But we did this all from the beginning, and part of that was we set out to do this business and try to build a foundation, put all the effort into building a foundation to think about building TravelBank over a longer period of time. And so we didn't really want to take too many shortcuts. We wanted to spend the time to do it thoughtfully and put everything in place. And that way we can stand by it to support our customers. And we have checkboxed all of the requirements to deliver a first-class experience for our customers. And we felt this was just part of the foundation. Now, it took a little longer, and we did get a little lucky because we had all the people in place to help us build this faster. But we have certainly spent the effort and the investments early on to be able to access all the supply and to get that going. Now we're doing we've launched the hotels with 650,000 properties, and we've also launched with 40,000 direct connects with the hotels for hopefully better exclusive rates that we can offer our customers. And now limousine and the ground transportation experiences, I think first off, I think this category is extraordinarily exciting. I think if I look at the innovation that's happening around travel in general, I think transportation actually it may be at the forefront of maybe becoming the most disruptive. I think it's not only the Ubers and Lyfts, but you're seeing all sorts of different permutations. We announced something with Turo and Get Around. I think you're starting to see a younger generation explore these kind of experiences. But the black cars, the limousines, I think are still all part of that. And last week at Altitude, we launched our super itinerary, our new concept. What the super itinerary is the ability for users now to bring in their calendar schedule from their office calendars. And we bring in all your flight and hotel check-ins, but we have also brought together a new marketplace. In the marketplace, we launched with 30 partners. We're beginning to kind of bring together what we would call the traveler-focused experiences, kind of on our mission of helping the traveler have a better experience. A lot of these areas are things that we wouldn't do ourselves. We wouldn't have the capacity to do it, but we know the travelers are spending money on these areas to help them improve their own traveler experience. And I think that's the advantage of having our expense system, because we can look at the data to see what people are spending money on. But some examples are like co-working spaces. We're finding a lot of people are spending time on expensing co-working spaces. They're expensing Wi-Fi, not only on flights, but also in country. They're spending a lot of money on that. We're seeing a lot of people spend more money on experiences, local games, of course, client dinners, all the food expenses. And so even things like meditation and wellness, gym passes, lounge passes, stuff that, maybe I've been around for some time. When we were in business travel, you would never dare to expense anything like that. However, as we study the younger generation that's coming up, the work-life balance actually becomes meaningful from a productivity perspective. And so how do we bring all this together and enhance the overall experience of the traveler? And again, these are things that, if I told you guys today that we're launching a meditation business, you guys might all hang up on this podcast. But, we instead are trying to bring together these experiences and really make them available. And I've only shared this story with you guys here, in the U.S. I know you guys are actually in Europe, but even in Europe, where the experiences. But imagine if you guys were to travel to Asia, and there's, David, this, there's no Uber or Lyft. How do we bring together the experiences there that can make it more comfortable, more trusting for the traveler to trust us experience that their company endorses through a travel program that they can leverage and use? Because maybe for a small business, they don't travel that often. And going to these countries, all these experiences will change. All the restaurant reservation experiences, ground transportation, co-working spaces. It's very difficult today we believe, for a traveler to understand all of that. But bringing it all together into a marketplace, making it available through your what we call the super itinerary, we believe is a first step towards that, and helping us kind of bring our vision to not just being flights and lodging and ground transportation focused, which is what we think this industry has been primarily focused on. A lot of the pre-trip experiences, it suggests that the in-destination or in-trip experiences are as meaningful as the pre-trip experiences, and largely that's all driven by mobile, which is where we've spent most of our time focusing on.
It's interesting, Duke. I mean, you sound incredibly ambitious and have a great vision. I think just for the last kind of 5 minutes or so, I think it'd be interesting to just kind of get some perspective on how the company kind of runs. So your two co-founders you've worked with before at the company that you sold to Microsoft, with his Parature. One of them is Reed, and Ching Ho, who was the CEO of the previous company, is now the chairman of the current company. How did you kind of go about creating the co-founding team? Was it purely because you'd worked with them before and you knew that they could do a great job alongside you? Or how did that all kind of come together?
It's actually much easier than you would ever believe, because when I left Microsoft, when we had been acquired by Microsoft, I had to sign a non-compete and non-solicitation, which probably is more relevant for this. And of course, that only really applied if the people stayed on. Now, I stayed on. The only two people that didn't stay on was Reed and Ching Ho. They left. So now Reed wasn't a co-founder of mine in my first company, but Ching Ho was. Reed had actually joined us a little bit later on as one of our senior engineers. And it was actually the best thing that happened, because through that experience, I was able to meet him. And that led to us founding this company together alongside of Ching Ho. Now, Ching Ho I've known for many, many years. When I started Parature in my dorm room at Cornell back in 2001, he was my first investor who flew up to Ithaca to see us in our dorm. And he has been a very successful entrepreneur himself. And so to get his help to, help us navigate our first business was extraordinarily valuable, in addition to his investment, of course. And so he was along with me for my first business. And when we started TravelBank, of course, we wanted to kind of rebuild this team together and get going. So that's how I ended up with both of them. We were both available, didn't violate my non-solicitation. And when I decided to leave, it was very easy to call them up and say, hey, this is, here's a potentially great idea in a very huge market. And of course, again, back to the beginning of the conversation around Concur, I think that the timing to do something, I would give it about 2 years when something like that happens, because as you guys know, we're not the only ones that saw the opportunity. I think being available as a founder, seeing the opportunity, and a catalyst as big as an acquisition of Concur happening, three things happening at the same time, making the stars align. It's very rare that those three attributes actually happen at the same time. But those that see it, if they jumped on it, I think, there would be an opportunity to build something. And so we decided to to take advantage of the opportunity to come out. And actually, instead of doing it in DC, we decided to move to San Francisco to build this business. And part of that was just, we had always read about Silicon Valley, building our own tech company from the East Coast. And we felt like, maybe if we did another one, we should try building one inside of Silicon Valley to see what it would be like. And so we decided to come out here to San Francisco to build this business. And I think it's been a very amazing experience, a very different experience in my first company, maybe for a longer conversation. But I think I can see why a lot of companies who move out here are very successful based on the community and the environment here.
It's
and
interesting.
I think that's really helped us as well.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I mean, it's interesting. You said the experience has been, very interesting and helpful, and the community is great. But you did reference in an earlier answer about, there wasn't a lot of other kind of resources that you could draw on with particular experience in travel. So would you say then it's just the experience of growing a business in that region that's been so interesting and rewarding, rather than what it gave you as a travel business?
Yeah, I would describe it, if I could describe it in a few sentences. Building a business in Silicon Valley with the community here, you have to keep in mind that 70% of the people here are not from San Francisco. Many people have come here, like myself, to go build a business and pursue a passion or a vision for what they want to do. So interestingly, San Francisco isn't a place where there, at least in technology, there isn't deep-rooted people. And whenever I meet someone from San Francisco, I get really excited because it's actually pretty rare that someone grew up here and I can actually hear the history. So because of the sort of transient nature of the city and a lot of new talent, in fact, if you do a little study on the biggest tech companies in Bay Area, most of the CEOs and founders, none of them are from this area. They're all from the East Coast or somewhere else. They all just happen to be here. I think one of the things that this community does is it forces people to be open to work with others, because you really don't know anybody. So you're in the same situation as everyone else. There's a level of there's sort of a cohort of similar thinking amongst the founders, because everyone's trying to explore and understand. They're open. People are more open-minded about using things that are different than my experience on the East Coast. I think that just has to do a little bit with the culture. But as we all know, being different, I think in technology can be a major advantage. But you have to have a community of potential customers that are willing to give you a chance.
Yeah.
And then finally, I would say our offices in Soma in San Francisco, our corporate lawyer once told me when we first incorporated, they said, Duke, you picked a great location. Within 5 blocks of your office, there's 2,000 startups. So you don't really have to walk too far. So I said, oh, okay. So I took a look around, and it's true. When we first got going, we served all these startups, and these startups, they all make decisions really quickly. They're willing to try something different, and they don't have anything in place. So as far as if I were to describe it as a petri dish, it's a great place to start a company, because you can really vet out your products. And by the way, if your products aren't good here, the community will tell you right away. They'll stop using your product. So, and they're all technology companies too. So you almost have to build a product baseline that meets the expectations of these startups, who they themselves are disrupting their own incumbents in their own industry. So there's no way to cheat the system. You really have to focus on building a great product. And I think when I look at this community here, it's very hard to create that kind of community anywhere else. I haven't seen that kind of concentration. Certainly in DC, it was much harder to find that. But here, we're all compacted in one place with very similar mindsets and expectations. So when you have a community and a sort of early customer base like that, I think it could be very powerful. It suggests that if you can make it out of this community, I call it like Little Italy in Boston or in New York. If you're an Italian restaurant, you better serve your food as some quality, otherwise the neighborhood will throw you the door.
Right.
I think you have that here in San Francisco. If you can't make it out of this community, you'll have a hard time scaling it outside of San Francisco or the Bay Area. So that makes this place rather unique. And I've learned a lot, even though we've only been doing this business for less than 3 years, but being able to build a business here, I think, keeps us on our toes. And forces us to continue to innovate, to be successful, to take care of our customers.
Okay, so just a quick one then from me before David wraps up for us. I mean, just as a kind of a fairly cheeky follow-up to that, if you weren't building a business like TravelBank in Silicon Valley, would you live there anyway?
I guess the question was if I were pursuing another startup, or just in general.
No, just is it a place that you would like to live anyway, even if you weren't involved in running a startup?
That's a great question. My family's here with me now. We have, we're very fortunate. We actually, since moving here, we've had twins, and it was an adjustment for me. I'll have to be honest about that. But there were so many amazing things about San Francisco. The weather, I think the people are very different, but very open, and because it's so many different cultures coming together, you may have some of the best restaurants as a result of that in the area, outside of just technology. I think it's a really great place to live. Now, it's a very expensive place to live, so that's why I asked you if I was doing another startup. To live here and not work, I think, would be challenging. But if there was something that we were pursuing, passionately, and it happened, we had a choice of where we live. Would it be San Francisco? I would say it would be a strong consideration for us to stay and to be a part of this community. So I would say yes.
Cool. Okay, great. Thanks,
cool.
David.
Well, thanks, Duke. That was really insightful dive into a very complex part of the travel industry. And we're out of time today. So this has been How I Got Here, Stories of Innovation in Travel and Transportation with Kevin May of PhocusWire and myself, Dave Litwak, the founder of Mozio. Next week, we'll be putting out another interview. Stay tuned. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the How I Got Here podcast. We'll be back next week with more inside stories behind startups and innovation in travel and transportation. Check mozio.com/move for a complete write-up of the highlights of every podcast with translations into 5 languages. And get your daily dose of news on the digital travel economy by subscribing to the newsletter at PhocusWire.com. See you next week.